Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting material from you all this time, really focusing on how we perceive ourselves, particularly around, learning and achievement.
Yeah, there's a lot here. We have your notes, some great articles, and one specific piece that stands out, evolution of self-awareness and the cultural emergence of academic and non-academic self-concepts.
That's the one by Geary and Zhu from 2022. So our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack how our sense of self, especially that academic part of it, actually develops.
And importantly, what it means for us, day to day.
Exactly. So let's jump in. One thing that really struck me from the sources is how new formal schooling actually is.
Right. We sort of take it for granted, like it's always been this way. But looking back, historically speaking, or even at some traditional societies today,
It's a blip. Universal formal schooling is incredibly recent.
absolutely. For most of human history, learning was, well, completely different, embedded in life, not separate in a building.
Much more hands-on, I imagine, like learning by doing, apprenticeships within the community or family.
Precisely. So this whole concept of having a distinct academic identity,
Mm.
that itself is a fairly modern construct tied to this rise of schooling.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's get into the evolutionary perspective mentioned in that Geary and Zhu article. They talk about different kinds of abilities.
Yes, they draw a really useful distinction. They talk about biologically primary abilities and biologically secondary academic competencies.
Okay, break that down. Primary abilities are.
Think of things that evolved over long stretches of time, things that were, you know, directly useful for survival. Spoken language is the classic example.
Ah, okay. Stuff our brains are sort of pre-wired to pick up relatively easily just by being around other humans.
Exactly. It develops pretty naturally in most kids in that social context.
Yeah.
No formal lessons needed usually for basic conversation.
Right. Like how a toddler just absorbs language. So then what are the secondary academic competencies?
These are the skills that are essentially culturally invented.
Yeah.
And importantly, they build upon those primary abilities.
Okay, like reading.
Perfect example. Reading, writing, complex math. Our brains didn't specifically evolve to read.
We didn't have books back on the savannah.
Right. So we repurposed or adapted existing brain systems, language processing, visual recognition, that sort of thing. And crucially, these secondary skills usually require explicit instruction.
Ah, so that's where schooling comes in. It's actively modifying or building on the primary stuff to create these secondary skills.
Exactly. Schooling is the engine, in many ways, for developing these academic competencies.
Okay, that makes sense. We take our primary ability for language and, through teaching, learn to map it onto these invented symbols for reading. So how does this link to our self-concept, our sense of self?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The authors argue that as we develop these secondary academic abilities, we naturally start forming, well, judgments about how good we are at them.
You mean like, am I a good reader? Or am I struggling with this math concept?
Precisely. And these judgments aren't just, objective assessments. They get woven into our self-perception, especially within that educational context.
So it becomes part of our identity.
Yes. The article stresses that this ties directly into our evolved systems for self-awareness and self-knowledge. We're kind of built to evaluate ourselves, our abilities relative to tasks, and relative to others.
So learning to read isn't just learning a skill, it's also creating a new dimension for self-evaluation, the academic self-concept.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, the article also distinguishes between universal self-concepts and these culturally contingent ones. Can you unpack that?
Sure. The idea is that some aspects of self-knowledge seem pretty universal. They're likely important across most cultures and time periods.
Like what?
Things like evaluating your relative physical abilities. Am I strong? Am I fast? How do I compare physically to others in my group?
That makes intuitive sense. In almost any environment throughout history, knowing your physical standing would have had real implications, right? For survival, social status.
Absolutely. So the argument is that this kind of physical self-assessment is probably a fairly central part of self-concept for most people everywhere.
Okay, so that's the universal kind. How do academic self-concepts compare?
They're seen as much more culturally contingent, meaning their importance, maybe even their existence as a separate thing we think about, depends heavily on the culture.
How so?
It depends on how much that specific culture explicitly values those academic skills. The authors state pretty clearly that the importance we give academic self-concepts relies on explicit social and cultural support for valuing them.
So, while knowing if you're physically capable might always matter, worrying about your geometry grade That only really matters if the society around you says geometry grades are important.
Exactly. In a society without widespread schooling, being a math whiz might not carry the same weight or contribute to your self-worth in the same way as, say, being a skilled hunter or a respected elder.
The value isn't inherent in the skill itself, but in how the culture frames it.
Precisely. The social and economic structures really dictate which skills get elevated
Mhm.
and, consequently, which forms of self-concept become prominent.
Okay, so if academic self-concept is so tied to cultural values, what does that mean for how students might approach learning? Does motivation change depending on the culture?
Oh, absolutely. This has huge implications. Think about a society that places an enormous emphasis on academic credentials for status, for
Mm.
careers, for social respect.
Like many modern industrialized societies, arguably.
Right. In that context, individuals are far more likely to internalize that value. Their academic self-concept becomes more central to their overall self-esteem.
And they'd likely be more motivated, maybe intrinsically, to succeed academically.
Probably, yeah. Success in that domain feels crucial. But flip that. Imagine a culture where, say, artistic skill or community leadership is valued far more than formal education.
Then someone's feelings about their academic abilities might not be such a big driver. Their motivation might lie elsewhere.
Exactly. Their academic self-concept might be less developed or just less important to their overall sense of who they are. Their drive would be channeled towards skills that are highly valued in their community.
So you could see huge variations in student engagement, resilience in the face of academic challenges, maybe even how they define success for themselves.
For sure. You just have to think about different communities, even within the same country. How much emphasis is placed on academic achievement versus, say, practical skills or family businesses. That cultural lens shapes everything.
It really adds another layer to understanding educational outcomes, doesn't it? Beyond just resources or teaching methods, there's this cultural valuation piece.
Definitely. It's a powerful undercurrent.
Now, obviously, we're not just our academic selves. How does this academic self-concept fit into the bigger picture of, well, our whole self?
Right, good point. The article touches on this by contrasting the culturally contingent academic self-concept with those more universal ones, like the physical or social aspects of self.
So our overall self-concept is more like a mosaic, made up of different pieces.
That's a good analogy. It's multifaceted. How we see ourselves socially, physically, academically, maybe morally, creatively. All these domains contribute.
And the importance we give each piece can differ dramatically from person to person.
Exactly. For one person, academic success might be the absolute cornerstone of their identity. For another, it might be way less significant than their role as a friend, or their skills as a musician, or their physical fitness.
So someone who's maybe an amazing artist, really valued for that in their circles, a bad grade might not hit their overall self-worth as hard as it would someone who primarily identifies as a straight A student.
Very likely, yes. The cultural context shapes the relative weight of that academic piece within the larger mosaic of self.
This is really clarifying. So let's bring it back to the listener, thinking about all this.
Well,
Why does understanding the cultural roots of academic self-concept actually matter to someone, personally?
I think realizing it's culturally shaped can be quite freeing, actually. It helps you understand your own relationship with learning and achievement.
How so?
You can start to see how maybe your family's values, your community, the schools you went to, how all that influenced how you feel about your academic abilities, both strengths and weaknesses. It puts your own experiences in a broader context.
Right. It might explain why you feel pressured about certain things or why academic success feels so important. Or maybe why it doesn't feel as crucial to you as it seems to for others.
Exactly. It can help make sense of your own educational journey, maybe reframe past struggles or successes.
It also makes you think, doesn't it, about how we as a society value different things.
Yes. Are we maybe putting too much emphasis on just one kind of intelligence or competence, the academic kind, potentially overlooking or undervaluing other vital skills and talents?
That's a big question. Could we foster a broader definition of success?
It's definitely worth considering.
Okay, so wrapping this up. The big takeaway seems to be that this thing we call academic self-concept isn't just innate. It's not fixed.
Not at all. It's deeply tangled up with cultural values and the relatively recent invention of formal schooling, which itself builds on our much older evolved abilities.
It's a real interplay between our deep evolutionary past and our specific cultural present.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So here's something to leave everyone with, a final thought to chew on. If our academic self-concept is so heavily influenced by culture, How could understanding that empower you? Could it help you consciously reshape your relationship with learning, maybe moving beyond old narratives or societal pressures?
Yeah, think about all the different places you operate, work, hobbies, family, community. Where are different skills valued? And how do you choose to define competence and growth for yourself in those varied contexts?
Lots to reflect on there. Thanks, as always, for diving deep with us.